Participants coming and joining. It always takes a few minutes, but let's get started because as usual we have quite a full agenda today. It's lovely to see everybody, to be with you online this morning. This is the third in the series of cross-country seminars that we've been giving under the program for Climate-smart Livestock. The first, as you will remember, was exploring some of the research that we're doing to help improve estimates of emissions from livestock production systems across Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia. Then last week we talked a bit about the challenges around understanding what's needed to adapt livestock systems to climate change. And then today we're going to do something particularly useful for kind of bringing those themes together, but also moving towards helping us to think about how can we make decisions, how can we think about planning today for what is a very uncertain and unknown future. And so our host today is going to be Laura Pereira. She is working 50% with the program for Climate-smart Livestock. She has a long background in working on understanding the impacts of climate change on food systems. She's done a lot of really interesting interdisciplinary work around futures thinking, around helping people use participatory exercises and visioning to think about what the future might hold, and more importantly, how decisions that we are making now, activities that we're engaged in now, can influence the future that we'd like to see. So this is a kind of a first introduction. In an ideal world, we would have been doing these exercises with you in person. We will do that once travel is possible again, and we can have in-person meetings. But we wanted to take advantage of the facilities that we have, and Zoom, and the fact that we're all getting very used to doing work together online to start this sort of introduction to futures thinking with you today. So I'm gonna turn off my video and microphone now and turn this over to Laura, please. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Laura, as Polly introduced, and I'm really excited to spend the next 2 hours with you talking about futures thinking and how it can improve our ability to make decisions in the present. I thought to ease us into this idea of thinking about the future, that we could start with a quick poll just to get a sense of how we even think about the future as individuals. Don't worry, there are no wrong answers to this. It's just to get a sense of the group. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to switch to the Mentimeter. Hopefully everyone has the code. I think we can also put the code into the chat so that everyone knows, anyone who joins later can also join us on the poll. So give me a second. And also just to say that we are going to be recording this session so that we're able to play it back to, so that everyone can see it again if there are any parts that you'd like to see, and also to be able to share it with colleagues who are unable to make it today. So hopefully everyone can now see, the poll. If you could give me an indication, that would be great. So far we've got 19 people who've already responded to it. And the first question is just an understanding of how we even think about the future. So whether we think of it as uncertain, unpredictable, foreseeable, controllable, navigable, certain, or fixed. So if you could just fill in the code and put in your ideas. It's really interesting that we've got, we're starting to see a bit of a split between an ability to kind of control the future and to foresee it versus thinking of it as a little. So far we've got 22 responses, 24 coming in thick and fast now. That's great. Again, this is just there's no wrong answer to this. It's just to get a sense of what everyone is thinking. Great, and I'm just going to wait for a few more people to respond, because I know we have more than 24 on the call. Maybe when we get to 30, I'll move on to the next one. So please also let us know if you're having difficulty accessing the Menti. All you need to do is go to menti.com and then put in the code 531717, and you should be able to have these questions come up in front of you. So the code is 531717. Okay, one more. I think everyone's just warming up to this, so it'll take some time. I think a few more people are also just starting to join us, which is great. Okay. All right, so I think we've got a good sense, an interesting sense of quite a lot of people thinking of the future as being uncertain and unpredictable, but also some with the sense of that we can actually foresee the future, that it's to a certain extent controllable, and that we can actually navigate it, which is quite interesting. No one thinks that it's fixed or that it's certain, which is interesting, especially for decision-making purposes. Okay, now I need to. All right, so the next question, just open up, is how comfortable are you with thinking about the future? So this should be available for everyone to click and fill in now. Not so comfortable. Not so comfortable. Okay. Very comfortable, great. Very uncomfortable, okay. Starting to get a spread now. I feel like this is a running commentary, almost like in a race, a horse race or something, where you start to fill in the results as they come in front of you. Okay. So definitely the majority feeling not so comfortable. Some people comfortable, but also some people who are also very uncomfortable. And I think that that's exactly why we're running a session like this one on futures thinking, so that we're able to maybe get everyone a little bit more comfortable in thinking about their future. So that's 21. I'm just going to wait at least until we get the 26 we had before. So don't worry about take your time and think about it. Okay, we have 42 participants on the call, so I'm definitely going to wait for quite a few of them to join. Hopefully everyone can see the slide. Those who've just joined the session, we're just doing an introductory poll, as Laura Kramer has just put into the chat. We're on menti.com, and then the code to enter is 531717. And this is just to get everyone to have a sense of thinking about the future. There are no wrong answers. It's really just to have everyone start thinking about how they conceptualize the future themselves, and so that we've got an interesting starting point that I can work from when I do the presentation, and then we go into the group discussion work. Okay, so it looks like we're stagnating on 21 people, but I think we've got a pretty interesting sense here that in general, people are not extremely comfortable with thinking about the future, but there are some that are very comfortable or even comfortable. And that might be because they've gone through some kind of scenarios or futures thinking training, or it's just very part and parcel of what they do. But I think when it comes to decision making and making choices about the future, in the present, that these are important skills that we can start to cultivate in ourselves. Okay, the next question is, thinking about the future for me is too uncertain, a bit abstract. I'm sort of comfortable on some topics, but not on others, or I'm very confident envisioning the future. So this is about, not just it's about how we actually deal with the future. And we're happy with visioning it, or if it's just a little bit too abstract or just too uncertain to even deal with. And just to give everyone a little bit of background, these questions were actually run as part of a CCAF's sort of scenarios and futures thinking workshop that was run in the SADC region over the past 2 months. So what we're actually trying to do is collect a series of general information about how people do think about the future, sort of how comfortable they are with it, so that we can also have a bit of a baseline to understand where everyone's coming from when we start to do these kinds of workshops. So also just to say, this is not coming from nowhere. This is going to be, this has been part of another process working in the SADC region, which I think is quite interesting to be able to see everyone's different conceptions. So it seems that so far we don't have anyone who's particularly confident envisioning the future. I think in general there's consensus that some topics people are comfortable with, but others that they're not extremely comfortable with. But for some people, for a good number, it's also just a bit too abstract to think about the future, or it's actually just too uncertain for them. And I think these are all really important things to consider when it comes to decision making, because that's largely about the future. So I'm just realizing this is something that we can take on board and maybe help to address when we think about the future. So really interesting that no one is 100% confident about visioning the future, which is interesting. Okay, all right. So we've got, seems to be 25 is about our threshold. Hopefully everyone, there are still some people joining the session. So if you look in the chat, the details on how to get to this poll, it's menti.com, and the code is 531717. Okay, the next question is, okay, sort of very simple. When you're planning for the future in your work, sort of what time frame do you tend to work with? Is it, do you think about next year, maybe 2023? Do we think of 2030 potentially? I put in 2063 there because that's sort of sitting within the AU plans. All right, there we go. Cool. Interested to see the spread of things here. Okay, 2063, fantastic. Good to get a spread. I think this year of 2020 has just been such a roller coaster ride that I think even thinking about next year is extremely difficult for people. I know it is for me right now. But this is, yeah, so generally planning within your work. What are the kind of timeframes that you work with? So there's an interesting spread here. A lot of people thinking sort of between now and 2030, a few into the further future, and some just thinking about, yeah, next year, what are the main plans? Super. So 21 respondents, which is great. Just going to wait for the other few. As I said, I know we have at least 26 because they were on the first poll. And don't worry to take too much time to just think about it. Whatever your gut instinct is, you can just put that down. As I said, there's no wrong answer. So it's just whatever first comes into your brain is a perfect response to this. Cool, okay. So few thinking about sort of very far future, some sort of sitting mid 2020s to 2030, maybe thinking around SDGs, and then quite a few just within the next year or two, which is interesting. Okay, we're coming towards the end of the poll. Okay, this is just to get a sense. This is the last question about the kinds of tools that you use to plan for the future. Sort of, if you just sort of use your own personal intuition about things, your experiences, sort of maybe from the past, and how you've been able to use that. Scenarios, log frames, strategic planning, impact pathways are all sort of very specific tools. And then there's other if none of them actually work. Cool, okay, we got a spread. Okay, interesting. So quite a lot of people work with strategic planning and scenarios. That's really great because we'll be talking about scenarios in the session, but also personal experience and intuition, really important. Log frames, impact pathways. It's great to see that all of these tools are being used by my people. And I'd be really excited to hear what some of the other tools are. Maybe whoever's sort of put in the other, you're able to just type into the chat what those other tools are. And maybe we can also share those in the group sessions that we'll be coming up with. Okay, so a nice spread here, a lot of personal experience, strategic planning, scenarios. Log frames, I know in sort of the development world, that's definitely almost the preferred way of thinking about at least project planning. Impact pathways, also really interesting, useful, and then personal intuition. Okay. Just if I could please ask, yeah, anyone who's, there's an annotate function where you can actually draw on the screen. So just be careful if you accidentally click that. Thanks. Okay, fantastic. So sort of, I think generally what the poll has shown us that there's a range of sort of comfort with thinking about the future, that people take a variety of different timeframes into account when they think about the future, but that they're also it's sort of a wide range of different tools that we actually use to help think about planning for the future. And sort of that gives us a really good starting point for the brief presentation that I'm going to give. So I'm going to close the poll now, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can do that. And then I'm going to bring up my presentation again. Share that with everyone. Great. So hopefully you can all see my screen. I'm not going to turn my video on because I think that that will just take up some more bandwidth. But because this is also the third and final workshop in the series of workshops that we've been undertaking as part of the program on climate-smart livestock, I also wanted to just to give a brief overview of where we've come from over the past few weeks. So it was really great that Lutz sort of sent me some of the take-homes from week one when we were talking about mitigation. And so sort of some of the key concerns or areas of interest from people was about data availability, specifically for livestock systems around mitigation in the region, the costs for deriving such data versus the benefit of actually having them, and that there's also quite a lot of variability in the data. There was also sort of questions about talking about different levels of extension and being able to actually link research to development that's taking place on the ground. And then I think, as always, just talking about the capacities, institutions and training that we actually have to think about mitigation, in particular greenhouse gas quantification. So then last week we were talking about adaptation, and Todd sent me some of the main take homes from the discussion last week. And that, the starting point is that there's been very little research that's actually been done on adaptation practices, specifically for livestock systems. At ILRI, they've identified 5 key domains for adaptation work, which is rangeland management, feeds and forages, genetics, health, policies, and institutions. It's also important to think that adaptation is going to involve a mix of technical and institutional aspects, and that different processes will actually interact with other non-climate processes. So we were talking about sort of political, social, economic, and other kinds of important processes, and that adaptation tracking development is underway. And we'll look at both environmental and socioeconomic data. So that's just a brief recap for those who were in the previous 2 sessions. We were talking about mitigation and adaptation. And then this week, as we've mentioned, we're going to be talking about futures thinking, and in particular, using the future to enable transformative change. So I'm going to, give you the take-home message at the beginning, so that we already know where we're going. And really, for me, the importance is to say that we're moving beyond prediction. As the poll indicated to us, the future is uncertain. It's not fixed. No one said that the future was fixed, and so we need to get our mindset to move away from prediction and to be a little bit more comfortable with uncertainty, because it's not going to go away. So very short-term trends might be predicted in some instances, but mid and long-term developments are contingent on so many different interacting factors that there's a lot of complexity. And so actually prediction is almost impossible and can be a dangerous proposition, actually, and when we think that we actually know what the future is going to look like. So scenarios are really useful tools, as many people mentioned in the poll that they've already used them in their planning. And they're really about sort of moving away from this idea of predicting one future and thinking about the multiple possible futures that are actually out there. And so you can think of scenarios as what-if stories about the future, and they can be told in different ways. You can use words or numbers or images. And the important component of them is that they crucially explore future uncertainties, and they're context dependent. So they're not about predictions, but they're about actually drawing on complexity and systems thinking. So you can see on the right-hand side, when the North Korea-US tensions were coming up, that there were 7 potential scenarios, 7 potential stories of how the future could have unfolded at that point. It's important for us to think through these multiple contingencies. Scenarios are also quite often used in policy making and decisions. And this is a graph that was taken from the IPBES 2016 report. IPBES is kind of like the IPCC for biodiversity. And here, you can use exploratory scenarios to think about multiple futures if you're looking at setting a particular agenda. You can also use target-seeking scenarios, sort of, for example, thinking of the Agenda 2030, the SDGs, where you've got a particular target that you're trying to get to, and think about different pathways or ways to get there. And that kind of helps you in the design phase of policymaking. You can also use different scenarios to think about how different policy impacts will actually land up in the future. So you can screen the ones that are more likely to achieve your outcomes versus others. And this is largely around implementation. And then you can also sort of retrospectively evaluate your policy, sort of looking at where you thought you were going to go with the policy implementation and where you actually landed up going, and to see sort of what actually happened in order for you not to achieve that goal. So there's a lot of learning that you can do with the use of scenarios. And the origin actually originated in the military. So they're not haven't been used academically all that long, probably for the past maybe 20 or so years, but sort of mid in the 20th century, there was a military that mainly started to use them. And then think tanks like Shell were famous for some of the use of scenarios in corporate decision making. So they, as I mentioned before, they could be stories, but they can also be used in quantitative research. So a lot of scenarios go into modeling. particularly in the climate change arena. They can also be used to bring a range of different stakeholders together, you know, and they can have many different functions in that region, in that arena, whether it's just really making explicit the different kinds of futures or perspectives that people have. And now they're employed in many different fields, and there are many different methods for actually doing scenarios. You can do, I'm going to go through sort of 2 today and explain those, but there really are a wide range. And again, it's one of those things where, you know, people are continuously innovating and thinking of new ways of coming about scenarios and applying them to their particular contexts. So I also just wanted to put these 2 slides up. This is coming from my colleague Joost Vervoort at Utrecht. And this is really just kind of to unpack and maybe move away from the very linear thinking that we tend to have when we think about the future. So we tend to think that there's one kind of singular past, that, you know, the future is broad, but, you know, when we think about forecasting and prediction, that there's only a small range of the way that the future might be able to unfold. But if you actually think about it, there might be multiple different pasts and multiple different presents. And by that, I mean that everyone has their own different experience of the past. And, you know, history tends to be told from one different perspective. So, you know, I'm from South Africa. You can look at the multiple different histories of how apartheid was actually told in the country, and you recognize that no one actually has one particular perspective on how the past unfolded, and that leads us to multiple different ways of being in the present right now. And if we think about the future, we need to also recognize that we're all coming from very different places with very different experiences, and that is important when we think about how we actually move into the future. And so the idea is really to break open and have a much more diverse understanding of where the future might actually be able to go. And that can be very difficult for us to think about, but it's really important to recognize this diversity and the plurality of options that we're coming from. And so the 2 axes approach is probably the most conventional, the most familiar way of doing scenarios that everyone has probably encountered. It's really accessible and easy to understand, and it's really helpful in scenario processes that also want to do a quantitative analysis, potentially around modeling. The problem is that you know, you're thinking about the future only by 2 sort of drivers of change. So what you can see here in the diagram is that there's one axis along the x-axis, which looks at the level of adaptive capacity, sort of from being very high or being very low. And then the other axis or driver of change is looking at political and economic alignment. And so whether that's sort of, there's weak alignment or there's strong alignment. And just by putting those 2 different drivers together, you get sort of 4 different options. So you get in the top right-hand corner, sort of high levels of adaptive capacity and strong political and economic alignment. And that gives us a world that they've called clever together in this Rockefeller scenario report. In the bottom left-hand corner, you're looking at low adaptive capacity and low political and economic alignment. And that sort of results in a world that they've called hack attack in this example. So what you can see is just by having 2 drivers, in this case, adaptive capacity and political and economic alignment, and you already get 4 very different kinds of worlds that open up. So that's really easy to understand. It's relatively easy to quantify, but it is limiting us in terms of thinking about all the diversity of different options and processes that are out there. So that's something to bear in mind. But it is the standard kind of approach that we tend to use in scenarios. So going back to just understanding how we can even use this process for policy guidance, and I wanted to put this in because it might be useful for the discussion later, is sort of 2 main approaches. So you can start off with a draft plan or policy. And for example, you can use the 2-axis approach to come up with these 4 different stories about what the future could look like. And you sort of test your plan in those different futures, and you see how how robust or how useful that plan is in that future that emerges. And learning from that, you can come up with a more robust plan going forward. The other way of going about doing it is that you start off with developing these 4, it doesn't have to be 4, it can be more worlds. And you think about what these futures could look like, and you use those futures to inspire different kind of elements of your plan. And then you combine those together so to sort of test them and see what is most compatible. And this can also help you in coming up with a more robust plan. So both of these processes, as you can see, the first one was used around climate change in Honduras, and the second process was used in Bangladesh by the CCAF's scenario team. So this is sort of a direct application of how thinking about these different kinds of worlds or different kinds of futures that emerge can help us in our policy planning process. So what was done a few years ago is 4 socioeconomic scenarios for East Africa. And I think some of you might be familiar with this process. So they took the 2-axis approach, and on the x-axis, you see sort of governance. So you have on the left-hand side, sort of very proactive governance. On the right-hand side, very reactive governance. And then you have sort of regional integration on the y-axis. Sort of at the top, you've got high levels of regional integration. At the sort of bottom level, you've got sort of a very fragmented or almost status quo. And I really love the images in this. You know, you've got herd of zebras where you've got reactive governance with regional integration, sort of industrious ants, proactive governance and regional integration, and then lone leopards and sleeping lions are the 2 different options around sort of a fragmented society. So these were done for the East Africa region. But they haven't been sort of well applied in the livestock sector yet. Sort of that there were, again, you know, limitations of just thinking about these 2 different drivers of change where there might actually be some other really important drivers to consider when we think about the future. But what has been done is you can sort of take these stories that come up in the different blocks, and you can actually quantify them and put them into models. So here you can see for Uganda, sort of the change in modeled land use and land cover based on 2 different sort of models. On the left-hand side is the baseline of 2005, and then the future is a sort of an idea of what land use could look like under 2050 using the sleeping lions scenario. That was this bottom right-hand one, which was a fragmented status quo and reactive governance. This is what it sort of means for land use change in Uganda. So you can see how you can go from stories to sort of very quantified modeled results. Here, unfortunately, I didn't have an example for East Africa that was really simple to explain, but this is for South Asia. You can see across the bottom for the years 2020, 2030, and 2050 that there are 5 different socioeconomic scenarios. So New USA, Jugaad, People Power, Precipice, and Stable Flourish. And using different kinds of climate models, as well as no climate change, which is the blue bar, you can look at sugarcane yield differences based on these different scenarios. So this is another way where you can look at sort of very specifically quantified impacts of how these different stories unfold into the future. Just wanted to give you a flavor of the different ways of using scenarios. So you've got everything from narratives and visuals to sort of like spatially explicit scenarios, quantified scenarios where you can actually see the difference in kind of impacts on key crops, for example. And then also videos, sort of telling stories, being able to communicate different ideas about the future. And thanks, Laura Kramer, for putting the link to the report that a lot of this information is drawn from into the chat. Okay, but I wanted to take a step back and sort of go back to sort of the poll questions and what we were thinking about the future. And the warning, you know, the take home that I said at the beginning, that it's not necessarily, we're not talking about prediction. We're talking about sort of becoming more comfortable with uncertainty, but still being able to nudge our decision making to get to potentially a more desirable place than where we are now. And so I really like this quote from Lao Tzu, which is, if you don't change direction, you may end up where you're heading. And I think that, when we're talking about climate adaptation, when we're talking about trying to achieve the Paris Agenda as well as the Sustainable Development Goals, we're continuing on this very business as usual trajectory. And it's really about how can we change our way of thinking to do things in the present that's going to help us actually get to a different place, that we don't continue in the same direction that we're currently heading. And for this, I think it's really important to talk about images and stories about the future. So not just necessarily how they're quantified or what they look like in models, those are very important, but to just open our minds into thinking about what are the kinds of futures that really inspire us, that we really want to get towards in the future. And there are a variety of different tools for doing this. And as part of the PCSL project, this is one of the focus areas that we're really going to try and develop, is thinking about what sort of more desirable and positive futures for livestock in the region. What do everyone think that they think? What do they look like for a variety of different people? And so what I wanted to do, and hopefully everyone's got access to the chat, I can see it now, is I'm going to show images from the 4 different East Africa scenarios. And I just want everyone to sort of take a look at this industrious ants, the set of images. So they're no words, they're no numbers or anything. And I wanted you to just type into the chat some of the descriptions, like what do you think is happening in this world based on the images that you're seeing? Again, there are no wrong answers. Just sort of type in what you think these images are telling you about this particular future for East Africa. And I'll give you some time to think about it. Anyone? Any thoughts or ideas on what's happening here? For me, I'm particularly struck by sort of what seems to be quite industrious agriculture. There we go, mechanized agriculture is the best, but it could lead to, sorry, I need to move that in. To rich farmers, but also fat people, obesity crisis, fast food. Yeah, that's sort of what I'm struck by, is kind of the tensions between this. Yeah, so there's a lot of emphasis on kind of intensive agriculture, private profits, and then also the implications of agriculture for our food system. So not just growing the food, but also what happens when we actually land up eating it. And I think, what you can see is big differences potentially in sort of those who are unable to access this food. The concentration in a few private individuals, exactly. So even though you're looking at what is potentially what was seen as a more desirable scenario of regional integration and a lot of sort of political alignment, yeah, you also see that there are potential other implications of that if you apply it to the food system. So the next image is the herd of zebra. And are there any sort of thoughts or ideas around what these images are trying to show us about what kind of future might unfold under this story? Anyone? So this is always the difficulty with doing these online. I can't just pick out someone from in front of me. Okay, thanks, Laura. Yeah, greater disparity. So sort of it just reinforces the differences between sort of what public can access versus private. Yeah, one size fits all, that it doesn't really take into account the nuances or the differences within different regions. That everything should apply irrespective. So that's sort of largely around the large scale infrastructure, etc. yeah, that there's a dominance of sort of dependence on Asian tigers for money, that is sort of not generated from internally. So, you know, I think that the images sort of were able to interpret in multiple different ways and can tell really interesting stories without us actually having to put specific numbers or text to them. The third one is the lone leopards scenario, which I thought was also quite interesting. Thanks, Bernard. Yeah, from the previous one, disparity in development is different priorities. Exactly. So here I find a really interesting link to, you know, to the SDGs Vision 2030. And then, you know, something that could be quite controversial potentially is sort of the level of national sovereignty that's actually holding the East Africa community from being able to achieve this vision. Yeah, and I think that, you know, that's something that is being captured in this image, could potentially be something to discuss, whether this is actually how people see the future. So again, these are just images. They're not definitive about how the world actually is. It's just helping us to think through some of the implications of the future. Yeah, derailed access to regional value chains, exactly. And then finally, there's sleeping lions. I think this is quite a almost quite obvious. Yeah, many obstacles exist to achieving the vision. But again, as Lutz said, they're always innovators, no matter how difficult the situation is. That's true. In sleeping lions, you know, this is sort of quite clear about, you know, donor aid going directly to the state, but clearly not having any actual impact on the ground. You know, I think you're seeing a lot of environmental impacts starting to come out of this. Again, the inequalities, the disparities, private and public, sort of infrastructure and housing, even levels of deforestation. So this was kind of the opposite to the industrious ants. And again, this was a scenario that had all of those land use change projections for Uganda that you could see. So yeah, this was just to get us thinking about the future and what sort of some of the complexities are, again, that we're not sort of predicting things, but we're just helping us think through what might unfold, and so we can make better decisions in the present. Yeah, so exactly, lots of donor aid with no actual translation to the ground. Another thing that I think is really important to think about when we talk about the future is that we're sort of surrounded by a lot of dystopia narratives. And by dystopia narratives, I mean really important discussions around, if we continue to do what we're doing, we're on a very bad path. You know, so if we continue business as usual, the impacts of climate change are going to be quite disastrous the world around, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. If we look at the continued levels of deforestation, what we're going to land up with is a pretty disastrous world. You're even looking at how the coronavirus pandemic has just unpacked so much of the inequalities that were sitting at the surface of our global systems, and just really put them into stark contrast to sort of the futures that we actually want to achieve if we look at the Agenda 2030, for example. And there are very few stories of, other than describing what these targets look like, there are very few stories of how those targets actually translate into the world, how people's own sort of visions and aspirations for what the future could look like. There are very few of those stories of things going well. And so this is something that we want to really talk about in the PCSL project, is to think about, you know, as important as it is to unpack the potentially really disturbing stories about the future if we continue to act as we do, that there's also a really important space for thinking of more desirable stories that we can actually navigate towards. And this is a quote by Alex Evans that I really like, because stories are powerful things. They create our reality as much as they explain it. And I think that, you know, if we keep on telling our stories of doom and gloom, then that's kind of where we start to orient towards. And so we also need to start telling ourselves stories about how things could get better, and empowering in ourselves and giving us agency to actually start working towards those futures, as diverse and plural as they might be. And so this comes from this idea of thinking about transformation from the Seeds of Good Anthropocene project. So if you look at sort of a colonial Africa that went through a rapid transformation under independence from the middle of last century, what are the kinds of similar, really transformative changes that sort of we actually want to see when we think about the future? So I've got an image here, can't move away from Black Panther. Do we think of sort of Wakanda as the future? Do we think of a much more nuanced kind of way of thinking about where we actually want to be as a set of, as a diverse group of countries and people on the continent? And so can we even think about what those sorts of transformations could be, or can we train our brain to actually help us in that process? And that's where the Seeds of Good Anthropocenes project comes in, where we sort of start with really exciting and useful things that are happening now, whether it's sort of work that particular NGOs are doing, or the role of specific technologies that could really be quite groundbreaking, and how those could actually link together and help us in these kind of very sort of diverse pathways of getting towards more inspired futures that are based in these interesting things that are happening. And that's largely the process that we're going to be planning to follow during the PCSL project, once, as Polly says, we're able to actually meet in person again. And I realize that I'm running out of time. I wanted to play this really short video, but I might bring this back at the end for us to play when we're coming back from our groups, just as we wait for everyone. But I think it's probably time now for the Q&A session, and then we're going to go into our breakout group. So we've got about 10 minutes, I would say, for Q&A. Thank you, everyone.
Great. So this is Laura Kramer. So Laura Pereira, we did have 2 questions in the chat earlier. And then if anybody else has other questions, you can put them in. Laura, do you want me to share my screen, which has the 2 questions in a PowerPoint?
Yeah, that's perfect. I'll stop sharing. Here we go. I'll put my video on now so you can see me.
There we go. Do you have the questions?
Sure. Okay. So that first one is so true. When you're actually taking the time to co-produce knowledge, it can take a lot of time, and in particular navigating the diverse interests. And I think that you know, I think it's still important to take that time because sort of everyone is learning as they're coming together. So I think taking the time is important, but I think that there are also new techniques that we're starting to use, particularly in sort of crowdsourcing information and being able to get people to sort of contribute their own ideas in a much sort of more platform kind of process. And I think that's definitely coming more to the fore now, as we're sort of forced to go online with a lot of these visioning workshops and things like that. So I think that could definitely speed things up. Another interesting innovation, which may not be speeding things up, but it could actually be sort of at least opening up and maybe democratizing processes of co-production a little bit more, is in gaming, to actually get people to, everyone sitting on their smartphones, being able to actually play games and contribute towards sort of thinking about the future and building these futures without actually having to spend the time together in a room. But as I say, I think being together in a room is also a really important process. As you say, co-production is kind of central to sort of building up knowledge across diverse interests. So I think it's about a little bit of both. Okay, so African ultra small scale, the most suitable model to ensure regional food security. I'm not going to answer that question actually, because there is no single answer, I don't think. I think that sort of one thing about thinking about the future is is that there is no one size solution fits all. I think we need to learn from the past, see what hasn't happened. I've got my own personal preferences, which is definitely more around ecological and climate smart agriculture. I think the most important thing that we need to think about is when we talk about regional food security, that it's actually not just a question of producing food. So you see this very largely within other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and I take my own in South Africa, is that we produce enough food, but the food security implication is actually about people not being able to have financial access to buy that food, for example, and that the kind of food that they are able to buy is unhealthy. So I think, we need to get out of focusing on food security is purely about improving small-scale farming, and think about some of the other broader political economic implications, and what would a more desirable food system look like that ensures regional food security, but that also potentially is empowering for farmers to actually do what they see as and sort of what their vision for the future is, but that's also adapted to climate change, and sort of not degrading of the environment, which I think has largely been the implication of external donor-driven sort of production emphasis that sort of came from the 80s, which has led to a lot of environmental complications in places like the US and even in South Asia. So I think, it's not a simple question, and it's something that I think you need to go through. If we knew the answer, one would have thought that, we'd have been able to do it by now, but it's not a simple response. But I hope that talks a little bit to some of the complexities and how thinking about the future can help us in addressing those kinds of questions, but together with the people that it involves directly.
And Laura, we just got another question, well, two more in the box. Someone is asking about examples of such games that can help speed up the process. And Dr. Zeo from Uganda is asking about how politics can interfere with the paths we've set out and what to do about that.
Sure. So with the gaming examples, I'll actually sort of, when we do the breakout groups, I'll try and find some and I'll put them in the chat. There are a few of them out there. A lot more have actually sort of been board games that people tend to play with each other. But the online ones, I'll try and find that, and we can definitely let you know more. My colleague Joost is very much into this, so he can definitely give more information. It's not my area of speciality. Politics, yes, you know what? And I think that this question of politics is once again about just recognizing that we have the politics in the first instance, because quite often we come up with policy that sort of is supposed to be implemented in this kind of pristine environment without making the politics explicit. And I think coming back to this question of co-production, the future can actually be quite a safe space to think about sort of actually getting a joint story of where you want to go, because without pointing fingers at sort of people in the present, so that we can all actually maybe reach some kind of, maybe not complete consensus, but general consensus about where we want to go. And then it's about backtracking the specific things that need to happen in order to get there. Though quite often we kind of make policy about sort of all of the issues in the present without thinking about where it is we necessarily want to go. And with that comes with it all of the politics of the present. So, futures thinking is not the silver bullet. It's not going to get us to necessarily resolve it's not going to resolve the political issues, but it can at least make them explicit, and it can also showcase how political infighting, other kinds of different sort of allocations within the political system, it can shed light on how they're actually holding us back from being able to achieve a vision that we can actually all potentially buy into and agree on. So that's one way of being able to use the future to help address some of those concerns. But again, it's not going to be the silver bullet that solves all our problems, but it is one way of being able to help address that. So thank you so much for questions. What I'm going to do now, Laura, if I could maybe share my screen again. What I'm going to do is just show everyone what the plans are for the rest of the session. I'm sure everyone is I know my brain's quite full at the moment of talking about futures. So we'll have a chance to be able to talk with each other in groups. So the plan for the workshop component of the session, what I'm going to ask you all to do now is to take 5 minutes while I allocate everyone to breakout groups, but to just take quiet reflection, a moment to think about what concerns me most about the future of livestock in my country. And in particular, think back to sort of what we heard about the mitigation, about sort of greenhouse gas emissions, the data availability, all of that we heard in the first session, as well as what we heard about adaptation, sort of the importance of thinking about the interconnections between sort of climate and adaptation, as well as other kinds of factors, political, economic, etc. So the first is what concerns me most about the future of livestock in my country. And the second point, and hopefully this is not as difficult as it sometimes is what am I most hopeful about the future of livestock in my country? So what concerns me, what am I most hopeful about? And we'll take 5 minutes just to quietly think and reflect on that while I get everyone into groups. Then we're going to go into a group discussion where our facilitators are going to share sort of answers, and you're going to sort of get everyone to introduce yourselves, and you're going to sort of share your reflections. And then the discussion points are really about the regional implications, about what are the similar concerns that different countries and different people have, what are similar hopes, what are the differences, and then in particular, we're going to emphasize what do we think can actually practically be done to elevate the hopes and to minimize the concerns. So the really practical action about thinking about the future. Then we're going to return to plenary and a maximum 1 to 2 minute report back from each group. I'm going to ask the facilitators to do that because I know that I can then tell them to stop talking if they go over time. And then we're going to do a final sort of reflection process using the polls, and I might be able to play the video again. So don't worry too much about a particular time frame when we talk about the future. You know, when we answered that question about how I think about the future, you know, let's take it at least something that's edging us a little bit closer to potentially 2030 or beyond. That is something that I would say. I quite like thinking in terms of generations when you think about the future. So thinking about 1 or maybe even 2 generations in the future, which gives us a lot more time to actually be able to do things. So you can have that discussion within your group. Don't be too concerned about the specifics of the future. I'm just going to open up quickly to see if yeah, this is quiet reflection time, and I don't think there are any chats of clarification. Sure. Okay, so if we could just do the quiet reflection, I'm going to put everyone into groups and then hand over to your facilitators. Thank you.
All right, we're all set there. But I need this one. Okay. So we had a few quiet reflection moments to think about what concerns us most about the future of livestock in our countries, both in terms of adaptation, mitigation, but I think we can add anything else too, if you have other concerns. And then we also want to discuss what's most hopeful about the future of livestock. And as Laura Pereira said, we can, you know, take the future to be any time frame that you think is useful to think about. So I think we can just go around and share our thoughts, and I will take a few notes once we start hearing some similarities. So Sue, do you want to go first?
Okay, so just to the first question, thank you for that, Laura. What concerns me most about the future? And I think, you know, one of the big issues that I find in my place of work is the belief that the particular breeds that we're breeding, in particular in our dairy sector, are the best breeds. So I guess what concerns me is our loss of our indigenous breeds, our loss of their adaptive traits, and our you know, the economic burden that farmers have to carry by the industry focus on particular breeds, in this case Holstein Friesians, maybe, you know, animals that are heavy feeders. And when we start looking at climate change and availability of feed and economic pressure on farmers, the animal welfare becomes a big concern as well, because the animals are less resilient, more likely to need more support, and less likely to get it. And that then, of course, one of the other issues, but it's not directly related to, it is directly related to livestock, is the impact of that on public health, on the livestock food products that are coming into the market, the food safety issues around that, the microbial resistance, and the likes. So there's a whole bundle of things that concern me about livestock currently in the country. And the big one, though, is very, very big, is loss of diversity of our indigenous breeds and loss of those adaptive traits, which if we focused on those, all those other things would be less of a concern.
Yeah, great. Okay. Martin, do you want to go next on what are your biggest concerns?
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of my biggest concerns is actually the very low productivity of our livestock. I mean, if you look at the productivity across the country and compare, you know, with other areas or the potential that is there, I find that as a big concern, because relating that then to mitigation, it means that the emissions per cow, you know, is very high if you look at it in terms of comparing that emissions to the productivity. And so for me, this is my biggest concern. How can we raise that productivity? Because if that productivity per cow is raised, then you have benefits in terms of mitigation, because the per capita emissions goes down, but also in terms of adaptation, you know, the benefits of that enhanced productivity obviously leads to, you know, enhanced adaptive capacity and adaptation. So for me, my biggest concern in terms of the livestock sector is still just in terms of that productivity. How can we improve the productivity? Because you know, while at the same time, you know, ensuring that we don't create other problems. But I think if we can sustainably increase that productivity, then we can have impact in terms of both mitigation and adaptation. And of course, I know enhancing productivity is complex. There's so many issues to be looked at. But I think if we get right those many issues and enhance productivity sustainably, then I think these issues of mitigation and adaptation can be addressed.
Great, thanks. And we have another participant who has joined us, Daphne. Welcome. So we're just going through the first question, Daphne, on what concerns you the most about the future of livestock. So Sue and Martin have already expressed their concerns, coming from slightly different perspectives, but I think some commonalities. And so Sintaihu, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Laura. I think you may have heard in a number of literatures that the livestock population in Africa, Ethiopia is placed in #1. So that's I'm sure with that you'll expect more to come from me, given that I'm in Ethiopia and I'm Ethiopian. So what concerns me in my country, even if with those livestock population has been cited in many papers and so on, including in my paper, is that the emphasis given to the livestock sector is really low by the government. That concerns me the most. And we also have the frequent policy change in the ministerial level who oversees the livestock sector in Ethiopia specifically. So that's really concerning me. And I also have really some kind of doubt whether this is the livestock population number we keep seeing, how often is really being validated. We don't have as such continuous census has been done at the national level. Even the number that you see in the paper doesn't really incorporate or include all the pastoral regions. And when you talk about livestock, the pastoral area where high livestock producers are there. And then again, when we talk about mitigation, adaptation, okay, what are really the major factors that are affecting the livestock production? We say climate uncertainty, variability, lack of feed, water. All those are the main effect of livestock production that are actually affecting them. To that extent, and we don't have as such well documented that bringing all the lowland and agro-pastoral area population data, which is really accurate. So finally, the other concern I have is what are the role of the private sector when it comes to livestock activities? So what are the nexus between the public and the private sector? And I see a lot of loss from that perspective as well. And you see a lot of intervention being given by NGOs. Of course, I used to lead the Prime project on the livestock marketing component, and I see really a lot of gaps. And then we sometimes take traders for exposure visit for them to see how the international market would look like. For example, if I give one example, is the Dubai food, it's called Gulf Food Fair. It happens every 1 year. So for us to take them there is for them to see what the end market will look like. So when you come to the country level, the livestock that is being sold in the country and the livestock that has been sold for the export, and if you take the price, you'll be amazed that the livestock that is being sold in the country is significantly expensive than the one it's exported. So what are really the gap there? How that really happened? So you see there, a policy issue again. That's how I actually link. So I think that's a few of explanation I can put in terms of the concern I have in the livestock sector, but I will keep talking until you guys fade out. But for now, that should be enough. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Okay, Daphne, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Yes, I also joined the others to think about their concerns about the livestock sector. And what comes into my mind very vividly is the fact that agriculture and livestock is intertwined. Number two, in our current situation in Kenya, the allocation to agriculture and livestock sector is so low. So what that means is that even the farmers, and I remember even in our presentations, we realized that all this is done by small scale farmers. who are unable to actually get their own extension and advisory services they cannot afford. The government is not giving enough to that sector. So that's my first concern. We may have very good policies about how to improve livestock and all that, but without the commitment of the government in terms of allocation of resources, it will be very difficult. Like in our country, when you look at the extensionists, both for agriculture and livestock, they are over 50 years, or actually 55, and they are almost leaving the service, and we don't see the young people being brought in. So what does that tell us? It's either, as the gentleman from Ethiopia said, the private sector now takes over, and the government actually supports the private sector to give advisory services to the livestock sector. Number two, my other concern, in our country, the land sizes are diminishing because we are subdividing to the smallest. And livestock, especially either the cattle, they require big chunks of land. Even if you are doing intensive agriculture where you have to get land to cultivate your own, vis-a-vis the lower parts or the drier parts where we do pastoral, we still need a lot of land. And that's a big concern in as far as I'm concerned. Unless there is a policy about consolidation where we have, like parts of Europe where I see farmers, when they're in livestock, they have land and they can do livestock. Whether it's intensive or not, they are able to take care of the animals, and then the prospect and whatever the animals are bringing is high. But in our current scenario, my concern is that either there'll be a drastic reduction of numbers, and that means milk, meat, and all the other products, including leather that comes from livestock, or somebody takes a bold step to improve on it. And climate change issues are not helping also, because now with the changes in weather, which is affecting both the pastoral and the intensive, the highlands, we are still seeing scenarios where something has to be done to actually ring fence the livestock production. Somebody with a mind that we need to improve on livestock production and the livestock products. Otherwise, in as much I'm confident about future, I see a lot of uncertainties, especially because of policy implementation. Okay, I can talk on and on, but I believe that those are some of the concerns that I see, but all is not gloom anyway, because there are some very serious livestock interventions that I've seen, both for pastoral areas and for the high intensive areas. So something is happening, but it's not happening as fast as it should. And that's where the private-public partnership should be emphasized very, very strongly. Thank you.
Thanks, Daphne. Sue, go ahead.
Just in line with what I'm hearing the other group members talking about, if we look back and you know, we started this looking at different scenarios and looking at how did we get to where we are and how can we then envision where we're going. If we look at where we've got to with agriculture in Kenya, if we go back to the 80s when the World Bank pooled funding, and that was the first time that our extension services actually collapsed, and that's when we got a lot of the NGOs coming in. That's when we got a lot of this support around small scale sustainable farming, whether it was organic farming, sustainable farming. It was more kitchen gardening to help communities survive. But there was also the introduction then of this zero grazing, a dairy animal, which again really impacted on our entire dairy sector. And then when we look at the type of animal and what the industry was driving, we ended up with this animal that we now may say is a low yield producing animal. I think what we lack is the actual, the economics behind the different breeds. If you look at, for example, a mixed breed that is producing 5 to 10 liters, but at a cost of 10 shillings a liter, versus a Friesian that can produce optimally 20 to 40 liters at a cost of 18 to 19 shillings a litre when the market price is only 22 shillings a litre. Well, which is the best animal to actually have in terms of the economics for the farmer based on his production system, his land size? It's a myriad of different things that we need to think about. But then if we now look at policy and governments, and we look at the North that is now saying, look, livestock, we should divest in livestock production because it's, you know, got such a massive footprint on climate change. Yet our governments, in order for us to put in the systems and services behind our smallholder livestock keepers, we do need donor support and we do need government investment. But most of the donor funds are going to be coming in with strings attached. And that's going to be against livestock production. We're already seeing that. So there's less money that's coming in to the fact that we need it. And then if we look at that now on a protein basis requirement for our populations and for our children, you know, so I guess what I'm trying to say is we as Africans and we as independent countries need to start thinking for ourselves about our people and about the solutions and the systems and the livestock that we have, and stop just blindly adopting and adapting to what's been happening and being pushed around by what's been happening in the North and in the West, because it doesn't fit with our solutions and our systems. Right now, our entire livestock system, when we look at the dairy system, it is absolutely dependent on imported acaricides, imported vaccinations, imported medications. Why? Because they're the wrong animals. And we're not doing enough about changing that. We have the right animals. We're not doing enough about that. So I think that, yeah, I just wanted to bring that somehow onto the table.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. So let's go on to the second question. I can't figure out how to send a message to Laura Pereira to find out when we're finishing. So I'm going to use my phone to do that. But let's talk about what is most hopeful about the future of livestock. So maybe we can go to Martin and then we'll loop back around.
Yeah, I mean, what's most hopeful for me, I think what I've seen is that the attempts to introduce sort of new forages, so-called improved forages, which is something that I think is part of what we need to sort of improve the productivity of some of our livestock. And I think then the issue is how well are we disseminating these technologies, and are our farmers able to adopt them and practice them, because some of these technologies have certain require certain capacities for the farmers to be able to adopt and use them in order to achieve the desired outcomes. So for me, that is an area that I think needs more focus, so that our livestock can be able to have adequate feed throughout the year, and that is able to at least improve their productivity. So that is an area that I think a lot more needs to be done, but I see potential there.
Great. Daphne, what gives you some hope about the future of livestock?
Yes, there's hope, because what gives me hope is the fact that many people are alive to the fact that livestock is essential for health living, especially we need the milk product and other products, and also the economic part of it. There is a lot of talk about livestock right now. To me, that's also a plus, because that shows that people are concerned with where we are going and how we are going. There's a lot of concern about climate change and how we can do to mitigate and adapt in the new scenarios. So I believe with all that, coupled with the fact that I hear more talk about our indigenous, are they called genes or what? Okay, the breed, so that we think about that which grows best for us. If it's our zebu cattle, we improve on that one without necessarily depending on the outside. And I like what Sue said, talked about, saying that once we get this help, it should be from within. Like if it's the acaricides that you're using and everything in the sector of livestock, we should think of how can it be homegrown. And with this kind of talks, I believe somebody is listening, and the policy makers and the policy guys who are supposed to implement this, and all of us who are here speaking about this, we can add our voice. Thank you.
Great. Sintayu?
Yes, I think my hope is that given the challenge I reflected is to have one standalone minister who is overseeing, leading the livestock sector, instead of being an add-up of as a piece from in different separated ministry. That's improving the policy, seeing the policy being improved in the sector. Ultimately, that to improve the production, obviously. Also for export, that's what I also see a big loss. And also to bind in the scientific evidence in terms of improving the constraint that the sector is facing, mostly the fodder productions. We have extremely, still using the traditional mechanisms, which is a grazing system to feed our livestock. We don't have as such, a feed processing, companies that are highly, involved in this sector. So maybe if I give you one example, so we have done this land suitability analysis for alfalfa. As you know, alfalfa is one of the feed used for animal, obviously in the state. They also use for human consumption, which has high nutrient, to improve their productivity. So what we did is we tried to map using current and different climate scenario to see where farmer, pastoralists, even enterprises, they could grow such kind of feed for feed consumption instead of 100% relying on natural grazing. And then also considering climate variability, because we keep saying climate is one of the issue. So I hope this kind of thing will really will come in, to improve the livestock sector in general. Thanks.
Thanks. And Sue, what are your hopes for the future?
So just in my space, in my work, I'm realizing more and more now that livestock farming is rocket science. It's very expensive, it's very high risk. You need a high level of knowledge in order to optimize production based on your production system, your location, your markets, your availability of inputs, your breed, and the purpose of what you're doing. And the livestock custodians are smallholder farmers who don't have access to all of these things to help them reduce that risk, and especially knowledge. And like I've said, the offset of that is low producing animals and issues around animal welfare and public health with products that are coming into the market that may be contaminated with everything from chemicals right down to pathogens as well. What makes me hopeful is that now we're going into a space where we can use technology to very quickly and rapidly and at scale reach out to the livestock custodians with the right information, not only information on production, but also tools that help them reduce their risks, that help them help support them. We'll take an example of a livestock keeper who has 3 animals. At any one point in time, each independent animal has a different need. One may be pregnant, one may be an in-calf heifer, one may be a calf, or maybe a bull. They all have independently different needs. They're not just looked upon as a herd of cattle that all need the same things. To actually optimize And when I'm saying optimize, I'm not saying push the animal to the extreme that it is producing 60 liters a day and is going to be dead in 5 days. I mean, if we look at the Ankole breed as an example, and the genetics within Ankole and the value within the Ankole, they are almost or being seen to be almost resistant to ECF. ECF is one of our biggest killers. Right now in this period of COVID, we're seeing farmers can hardly afford to spray their animals on a weekly basis. Most of those animals are predisposed to getting sick with tick-borne diseases because they don't have those adaptive traits, because we've got the wrong animals in systems. So just knowing that and being able to tell farmers so they can make decisions based on science, based on data, based on fact, based on the rich data that we're getting from conversations like this and others, will then help farmers, and being able to use tools to disseminate this information so farmers can begin to realize, oh, I could do this differently. I can get these genetics here. My animal's a dual purpose animal. It's great. My milk production only cost me 10 shillings a litre. It doesn't matter if I only have 4 litres. I'm optimizing on that animal's production based on the feed. Coming back to, if we look at the Uganda use of Ancoles versus our very, I'm just using the example of Ankole because I hold them very close to my heart, and I actually have a small herd that I'm trying to breed up to keep the genetics alive. Their adaptive traits are amazing. Their big horns that act as coolers, as radiators that cool their blood. They need less water. They can survive in the hottest conditions. Their milk has 10% butterfat versus, a Friesian of 3.7 at the top end. They're incredible animals. They're African animals, and we're ignoring them and we're not even thinking about the possibilities of crossing these into the exotic breeds that we bring in to give us an animal that works for us, that is not reliant on having to be sprayed every 7 days because it's got some inbuilt resistance. So I just like the idea that we can use ICT tools to get the information into the custodians of the animals that can help them make better decisions. And we can do it rapidly. As Daphne said, though, this is taking extension into the hands of the private sector. And unfortunately, the government is not supporting it. The government doesn't support it. The government doesn't acknowledge it. The government just thinks, let private sector do it, and we don't have to fund this anymore, and it's all going to be well and good. And the danger with that is, this is food security we're talking about. This is national security. And it should be something the government is supporting. And it should be something the telcos are supporting. They do it, what's the word? Reluctantly. We're a pain in their side. They do it reluctantly because they too don't see the significance of food security and the custodians of the land, the livestock, the crops.
Okay, so I think, thanks. This is great. I hope I'm capturing everyone's points correctly. Instead of just pulling out the similar concerns and hopes, because I think we have lots of great different perspectives here, I'm just typing up the concerns and the hopes. For main differences, I hear Sintayu talking about export out of Ethiopia, and I think they are linked to quite good markets. In Kenya, I feel like the livestock production still has more of an internal focus, producing for the local market. So I've put that there, but if I'm wrong, please let me know. So I think we have 5 minutes left, and what I want to do is just go once more around, 1 minute each. Yep, 5 minutes. And tell me what you think we can do to focus more on the hopes, elevate the hopes, and try to reduce these concerns. Are there little seeds of activity you see happening that you think could be scaled up, or just what can we do to kind of bring more hope into the livestock sector for Kenya and Ethiopia? So Martin, let's go to you.
One of the things that I think we need more is partnerships, people coming together. So for example, in Kenya now, agriculture is devolved, but like you've had people complain about, lack of extension services. And this is essentially because, during the process of devolution, these are things that were not critically thought of, so that the national government could partner better with county governments to ensure that extension continues, because that's a very important part. And I think it's because of these challenges that then we have the private sectors trying to step in and fill the gap. And also in terms of research, institutions like ILRI, universities like our own, should be working together so that, we have concerted efforts rather than everybody trying to do their own things on their own. The decision makers making policies without consulting, like research and the private sector. They don't know what the private sector needs in order to, step in and play their part. So I think, to me, one of the important things that we probably need to do in order to address a lot of these issues is to have better cooperation between, research, policy, implementation, the farmer representatives, and especially, to me, the fact that I see farmers have lost a voice in Kenya. I don't know in other countries, but farmers rarely have that voice that they can be heard. They're disorganized, and I think a lot of it is sometimes, deliberately by policymakers or even private sector to break up the farmers so that they don't have that sort of voice where they can demand for certain things. And I think these are areas that we need to look at so that we can partner better, synergize, and see where we can, not duplicate things, find strategic areas that needs more efforts, more resources, and so on.
That's great. Let's go to Daphne. Daphne, you're from the Women's Farmers Association, right? What do you have to say to build on what Martin has said here?
Thank you so much. Martin, it's like you read my mind. Actually, that was my point. Because if we don't start with the farmer, who is supposedly the beneficiary of all the research, all the investments, then we will lose the mark. And yes, it's true. The policymakers are not encouraging farmer organization. Penetrating policy as a farmer organization, there are so many blocks. They always say this about farmers, and every time you try to present an issue of the farmers, the first thing they ask you, how many farmers are your followers, how many, and then you ask them, why can't you even have those hearings that they talk about? They don't do it. It's done in boardrooms. So actually, my first point in breaking the stalemate or in improving the livestock sector is bringing the farmer on the table to negotiate and to say what fits them. If it's the pastoral, if it's the what you say in Kenya, the high intensive farming systems, we have them and they give their points through their representation. Of course, we won't have all the farmers there, but we have a lot of farmers coming together. When you start that, either the public sector or the private dismantles farmer organization in the pretext that they are represented in the other sectors, so we don't need farmer organization. But this is my first point. If farmers are well organized to give their points, then it will give us an opportunity to improve on what we are discussing right now. But the minute we leave the farmers out of the decision-making tables, then we are doing it for the elite. We're just sitting and talking. We are not improving. So first, let's bring the farmers on board. Number two, our indigenous animals. We need to think soberly about that. All that is important is not gold. Yes, we can learn, but why don't you have indigenous solution for indigenous issues? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
May I quickly add in something?
Yes, the breakout room is about to close, but please go ahead and then we'll get shifted back. Yeah.
I just think that where food security is such an important concern for any country, our governments need to step up and tell us what they're doing in that area of extension. And if it is mobile-based
So what I thought I'd do while we're just waiting for everyone to get back, and for the note takers just to finalize their notes, I'm going to play a short video clip about futures thinking that we did in the process in South Africa. And just to recall, if those who were recording in their breakout groups, you can stop recording now. So let me just share my screen.
We live in turbulent times and are surrounded by visions of dark and uncertain futures. Societies are changing and people are transforming the environment, the entire planet, in unexpected ways. In many places, we are increasingly disconnected from nature and from each other. These are key symptoms of a new geological era, which scientists call the Anthropocene. But there is hope. There are seeds of positive futures all around us, seeds of good Anthropocenes. These seeds are projects, organizations, initiatives that are experimenting with doing things differently and making an impact for the better. Better for people and better for our planet. But for now, these seeds are small, local, and not part of the mainstream. What would happen if these seeds were to grow? If they became towering trees with interlocking networks of roots, supporting and nourishing each other? What if these seeds became the way we do things, the way the world works? What would the future look like? This is what we asked a group of scientists, artists, and changemakers at a workshop in Cape Town in November 2016. Starting with 4 sets of very different seed projects and initiatives, we asked the participants to imagine what Southern Africa would be like if these seeds were to grow, combine, and become the new normal. We asked them to stretch their imaginations. We asked them to dig deep. As a result, the participants developed 4 radically alternative positive visions for the future. Although these visions differed in their details, they had many striking commonalities. All 4 futures are deeply shaped by technology. This technology is used in a way that enables people to connect to each other, to develop a shared understanding and empathy, rather than become isolated and distrustful. Technological advances also free people up from working just to pay bills. Instead, people work to contribute to their community, live fulfilling lives, and express themselves as human beings. In all 4 futures, power is highly decentralized, and people actively participate in decision-making. Societies are more equal and fair, and value the unique differences between people. Collaboration, rather than competition, is a core ethic. These values extend to humanity's relationship with the environment. Thoughtless exploitation of resources is replaced by responsible stewardship of nature, which is understood to belong to everyone. Most food and other goods are produced locally, minimizing transport and waste. Overconsumption is replaced by flourishing societies in which people respect ecological limits and each other. Idealistic? Yes. Impossibly utopian? No. These are our visions, and the seeds of these futures already exist. Let us nourish them, be inspired to plant more seeds, and let it grow into a beautiful new world.
Thanks, everyone. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen so that we can do the report backs from the different groups. Sorry, just give me a second there. I hope everyone is back with us. Just checking on the chat to make sure. Oh, thank you. Sure thing. I will share the video. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Okay, so just to make life easier, I'm going to leave it sharing. Here, and so the first report back is from Lena. If you could just give us literally a minute report back on what your group discussed.
Yes, absolutely. I will basically just read what it says here. So some things we talked about as concerns were that perhaps the information is not always reaching the farmers, and they're not included in the process of changing the sector. And also we talked a little bit about the limitations of technology, and you need to kind of see what is possible there, and also a lack of veterinarians locally, and a disconnection between what policies say and what you actually do when you implement these policies. And then some hopes were that there seems to be a willingness among farmers to adapt and to change, and that there are bottom-up initiatives. And one thing there mentioned was these village service providers or local capacity builders, which are people in a local community which are given knowledge or are trained in different relevant skills. And veterinarian services is one of those. And we discussed that perhaps these people can be kind of key actors in spreading information and helping communities adapt and mitigate climate change.
Great, thanks so much, Lena. Sounds like fantastic discussions. The next group is Marta's group, and all the participants were based in Kenya. Okay, interesting. Sorry, my allocation didn't work very well.
So yeah, we were all Kenyan group, and so the similarities and differences were a bit more tricky. But I will report back on first the concerns that came up in the discussion, which were all related to a lack of data on emissions, which makes it difficult to work and do future planning. There was also brought up that technology is not being used, even if it might be there. Policies are not implemented, especially on the county level or the lower levels of governance. We saw an institutional weakness or even lack of institutions sometimes, and a weak capacity within the institutions that are there. For the similar hopes, we saw again regarding technology, that technology has been improved and that it's there, but it needs to be disseminated. They also saw an increased awareness on adaptation in some parts of the country, at least. We also discussed capacity building efforts that are there, and also that in the last couple of years, adaptation has come up on the agenda, and especially adaptation regarding livestock. And that we saw an increased interest about climate change as well. So lastly, on the discussion about the elevating hopes and minimizing concerns, we talked about building scenarios to develop different pathways that can inform policymakers. And also that it's important to ensure co-production of knowledge in these processes. That there needs to be a continuation of capacity building at different levels, and also an improved coordination among stakeholders. So that was our discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marta. Sounds good. And also interesting that you had all your participants from Kenya. Nice to have a consolidated discussion. Chris, moving over to your group.
Yes, hello. So we had a really interesting discussion, and these were the highlights. So the similar concerns were that although many more people are acknowledging that livestock are one of the greatest contributors to climate change across the East African community, there's still not enough knowledge across stakeholders and farmers around what needs to be done, what are going to be the exact impacts of climate change. There is a lack of data, so that it's hard to create a baseline based on which there's going to be policy development. And another concern, which is really interesting, is that although indigenous breeds across the East African community are more adaptable to climate change, their productivity is still very low. So that's, it's hard to actually use them at a more large scale level. But, and also to tie this more with a similar hopes section, is that there is a lot of research that is being carried out around how to crossbreed indigenous seeds and actually increase their productivity while maintaining their adaptivity to climate change. And more people are starting to look at agriculture through a more climate lens. So people are understanding that agriculture is intimately linked to climate change. So through awareness comes change, as they say. The main differences, one of the key things that was highlighted is that in Kenya, people are producing more at a commercial level. So unlike, for example, Uganda, where agriculture is still a much more small-scale venture. And also in Kenya, there seems to be a lot of more of value addition from livestock products compared to Tanzania and Uganda. And yeah, just very briefly, what can be done to elevate hopes and minimize concerns? First of all, to follow pacts. So there are a lot of international treaties that set targets, and if we actually stick to them and allocate our resources efficiently, we can increase research, we can increase training, we can increase education for the public. And importantly, it is about including vulnerable groups, adopting, for example, a gender lens on agriculture, and including multiple stakeholders to make sure that everyone's voice is represented. And finally, I think something that we talked a lot about was how we can actually maintain elements from traditional agriculture and combine them with more modern agriculture and livestock herding techniques to basically get the best of both worlds. Yeah, so thanks everyone.
Thanks so much, Chris. I'm really glad to see the gender component coming up in your discussions. Laura C. Kramer?
Thanks. Yeah, so we had a great discussion. I had an excellent group. I had Sue, who is from private sector extension, Martin, who does research at University of Nairobi, Daphne, who represents women farmers, and Sintaihu, who is a researcher up in Ethiopia. So it was great to have so many different perspectives on all of this. And so and so because of that, you know, we had very different concerns, but with some overlap. A lot of emphasis on the need to have adaptive traits in the cattle, especially. We talked a lot, mostly about dairy, but the issue of kind of extensive systems also came up. And so there were, I think, an overarching concern was that there's a lack of allocation of government resources to extension. But one of the hopes is that, you know, we now have this greater ability to use ICT tools to reach smallholder farmers. And so that is what Sue is doing with her product called iCow. And so it can enable us to get the message out on what the feed needs to be, or what acaricides to use, or things like that. So those sorts of things are giving us hope. One of the differences we saw was that in Ethiopia, they do have export of livestock products that is going on to markets, usually like in the Gulf area. But in Kenya, the production is still more internally focused because the market here is so large for livestock products. And then, you know, one of the major things that we talked about that elevates our hopes and can minimize our concerns is if we can bring the farmer voices more into the table, into the dialogues, understand and not treat farmers as a monolith, but understand that they come from different production systems and have different issues, but really bring their concerns to the table and make sure that we're meeting their needs first. And so it was a really rich discussion. There's more notes there, but I won't read it all. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Laura. Yeah, really rich discussions coming from all of the groups, I think. We've got 3 more. Edwige, your group?
Yeah, sure. So we had interesting discussion. We had participants from all 3 countries, so we could also discuss differences between the different contexts. In terms of the similar concerns, there were concerns raised around the conservation of local breeds, and with the push with more productive breeds, are we losing some of the traits such as heat resistance that might be important? There was also the concern that extension service tend to still remain more focused on crops, and that there is a lack of awareness on climate change and adaptation and mitigation. And for the hopes, so it was towards a better extension service that are more focused to the livestock sector, that are more accessible and inclusive. Also adjusting the livestock species. I was also noting that some countries have more experience with this and switching to camels or to goats. Also hopes to improve the welfare and nutrition of animals, and also with animal genetics as well. And some of the main differences is that I was pointing out that the countries are at different stage, also in their breeding system, but also in different aspects such as manure management, fertilizer, but also dry feeding and crop livestock integration systems. And among the things that were pointed out to elevate hopes and minimize concerns was an attention to, in policy, more to the livestock sector and in particular to animal health. There was also towards using ICTs for dissemination and for extension services. I think there was the point made that this can also enable for the private sector to have a role to play in providing access to information as well, but also better market access. And that also came with the strengthening of extension services to make it more accessible. Also the need to raise awareness and knowledge, and also the strengthening of the breeding services to learn more from research about the traits that are desirable. And also a good point made about learning from other countries who are at more advanced stage, maybe in some departments. I think from a Ugandan participant, there was a point made that Ethiopia and Kenya have more experience in dry feeding, so there can be opportunity to learn from that.
Super, thank you so much, Edwige. Lucy, on to you. Lucy, you're muted. Are you with us? If not, maybe we can go to Todd or Phyllis, and then we'll go back to Lucy after that. Todd, Phyllis, sorry, I know Todd went off, so Phyllis took over in that group.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Phyllis, yes, we can. Go ahead, thank you.
Okay, yeah, would you mind just moving to the next slide?
Sorry.
Oh, yes, thank you. All right, so we had the 3 countries represented in our group, and in what we actually found out in that was the similarities were the low productivity in all the 3 countries, and mostly in Uganda and Ethiopia, farmers tend to keep large herds, and because there is low production. But then this, at the end of the day, leads to land degradation and big water footprint. Then we also realized there is the low adoption rates of mitigation options, and this was for all the countries. And then we also had low implementation of policies at farm level. And then again, there is the issue of land, availability of land. This is more because of fast urbanization, where people tend to start converting the arable land to residential land, and that as well was leading to low productivity. And then we had hopes as well, which were similar for the 3 countries, where we found out that farmers were motivated by adaptation rather than mitigation. But then we also realized there is that in some instances, we could have both adaptation and mitigation work hand in hand and get good results at the end. And then we also realized that systems are moving towards a more intensive systems. This is so that they can be able to increase productivity and cater the increased demand in livestock products. We didn't have any differences as at that time, but what we found that could increase or would minimize the concerns that we had was, for our case, was to change the narrative. Yeah. So the farmers will always ask how they are going to benefit from whatever new technologies we have. And then, and because of the low adoption rates, we thought if we were to change the narrative and convince the farmers to view their livestock keeping to rather when they're moving from extensive to intensive systems, to also look at their systems as income generating enterprises. And that I think that would motivate them at the end so that they can be able to adopt some of these new mitigation or adoption options that would be there. I think that would, at the end of the day, be a positive note. But then we also noticed, and this is mostly in Ethiopia, farmers are very much willing to adopt new technologies that would increase productivity and make money for them. But then what I feel would be the best thing to do, or something that can be done, is so that researchers not disappoint this willingness by disseminating the new information that is always the results we always get timely, and we can use avenues such as media to disseminate this, like was done a while ago in Mazingira with the sweet potato vine video that I believe has been watched over and over time. And that's we also had some few other things we saw. Like in Ethiopia, there is the mitigation option of farmers have started planting more trees in regard to that is afforestation. I think that is also a good thing. And that's it for my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. And thank you so much for stepping in to take over the leading of the group, the facilitation, when Todd went offline. Last but not least, and then I realized we're over time. The last thing is the final mentee. But Lucy, over to you.
Right, sorry about that. I had a problem with unmuting, but very quickly I'll take you through what we covered. We had contribution from members from Kenya and Uganda. And one of the main concerns that came up with regard to adaptation was the issue of breeding, in that is being done without enough guidance, and this has led to maladaptation, which in turn is not achieving the adaptation goal, which is, for example, to increase productivity of those livestock. And then there's the question of how effective the climate information is for farmers, which has an implication on how well it can be used to inform decision making. And then there is a concern about how well the farmers know what and what not to do when it comes to the adoption of some of the options that are promoted. And one that was particularly for mitigation is the issue of managing manure, especially in urban systems, as we see more people living in urban or peri-urban systems adopting livestock keeping. And what was the common hope in both countries is that we are seeing a lot of policies and plans by governments and support from other private actors supporting adaptation. So it gives a very good opportunity for scaling up and ensuring more people are able to adopt these adaptation strategies. Sorry, Laura, you just moved the slides.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. And then a difference is that in Uganda, they consider that they have better production conditions. For example, the areas where commercial production of especially dairy is done, they're able to do it at low cost, which gives them a comparative advantage when it comes to accessing the market. And when it comes to adaptation, is that in Kenya, then it would require more adaptation effort for them to be able to be at par with Uganda. And that led to what was some of the efforts that can be done to elevate the hopes and minimize the concerns. For example, having joint effort in promoting the dairy industry, and also having joint adaptation projects so that then we are able to benefit from some of the synergies. And then there's also a point about promoting feed industry, in addition to what we covered in the adaptation session about promoting feed varieties, especially from fodder. And then promoting local activities or production practices that are able to support adaptation and mitigation. For example, what the Mazingira team talked about, looking into how enclosed livestock production activities are able to help in reducing the emissions. And of course, the one about building the capacity of farmers in relation to adopting technologies and also using adaptation information. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Lucy, and sorry for changing the screen halfway through. I was trying to do too many things at the same time. So what I wanted to do now is I realized that there's a final question that I'm going to answer while I ask everyone please to open up and go to Menti again. Hopefully you can see my screen. This is the set of sort of exit questions. I've put the link to the questionnaire in the chat, but if you also just go to menti.com again and put in the code 469948, that should also get you to the screen. And this is just sort of a final set of exit questions for everyone. And sort of while we're getting everyone onto Menti, there was a final question that came into the chat around sort of the best scale at which to think about scenarios. Are we looking at local? Are we looking at sort of Africa region, global? And, you know, this is one of the biggest challenges that we have for doing scenarios. And increasingly, there's a lot of work on trying to do cross-scale scenarios. So both looking at very local level, context-specific sort of scenarios with a variety of stakeholders, being able to feed that into their national and then regional levels to see how well the stories actually align. And so that's a big part of the work that we're also going to try and do during the PCSL project component within the East African region. And then the additional to that was this question of dominant narratives, sort of how pervasive they are. For example, you know, neoliberal economic growth is going to sort of help us achieve everything. You know, and these are really, really strong, especially when you start to see the sort of those two axes components, where you quite often sort of see economic growth potentially as sort of one dominant driver of change, looking at sort of different political systems. So I think, you know, moving away from those 2x2 axes and some of the more conventional scenario components that people are used to, and going into these more creative, more bottom-up seeds approaches that are a little bit more creative, that think a little bit more outside the box, looking at innovations and sort of cutting-edge things that are happening in the world right now, starts to help us shift a little bit away from the dominant narratives that we have. And so really, really good questions, and thank you for that. And yeah, as always with these, we always seem to be running over time. Everyone, I hope, had really rich discussions in their groups at least, and were able to not just listen to me talk or look at my screen, but able to sort of really interact with their colleagues to discuss some of these questions about the future. And as you can see, I see we're starting to get people filling in going on to the Menti poll. This is really just a chance for everyone to think and reflect about not just this session, but also the previous two meetings that we've had over the past 3 weeks. And also just to give us, as a group, some feedback on what sort of you appreciated, what other aspects you think we could cover, etc. So I see that 15 people have answered this first question, this first slide. It shouldn't be that difficult. It's just sort of seeing which meetings everyone attended.
So if you can just click which ones you were at.
Excuse me, Lola. Excuse me. Excuse me, Lola.
Yes.
Sorry, I came in because there are already people raising questions in the chat that here the question, you can only fill in one option, yet some of us attended all the meetings.
Oh dear, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I should have changed that on the, I will remember to change that on future slides. Apologies. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide then, because clearly it's difficult for people to answer this question if they were in more than one meeting. Sorry for that. Thank you for letting me know. I'm going to move on to this next slide, which hopefully everyone can answer appropriately. Sorry, I should have checked this out beforehand. I hope everyone can access this. Yes, okay, great. Sorry, I don't have the chat open in front of me. That's why I can't see that. Thanks, everyone. Okay, we've got 34 participants, and so far 14 people have filled in the options. So I'll just wait for a few more. And great to see that people would be keen in participating in future meetings online. They're not perfect. I don't think they replace us being able to meet in person, but they're useful for keeping us connected during these disconnected times of the pandemic. Okay, I'll just give it a few more moments for a few more people to potentially give us their feedback. I'm aware that we're over time, so I don't want to push it too far. So I think 20 responses is super. Next slide, next question. This is just to rank the aspects of the meeting that were most useful to you. Sort of either the information, being able to ask questions or interacting with participants, taking part in polls such as this to be able to sort of see things, and then the length of the meeting. And this is, you can rank it in which order you think was the most useful to you. And hopefully this is working for everyone. We've had one person so far. 2 people. I'm not too sure if this will actually show up on the slide. It should do, but I haven't used this particular function in Menti before, so I'm learning together with everyone else. Okay, 13 people so far. I'll just wait until we get the 20 respondents we had before, if it doesn't take too long. Again, thank you so much to all of you for spending your time doing this final exit poll. It's really going to help us put together what's hopefully useful meetings and sessions for everyone. Okay, I think we've reached saturation point on this question. Interested to see what the final outcome is. Okay, this is building up a word cloud again, like we did last week during the adaptation. And yeah, so some of the useful things that I learned from these workshops. Oh, there we go. Knowledge exchange, futures. That's great. Okay, got 6 respondents so far. So a lot of focus on scenarios and futures thinking. I guess that's a reflection of having just come out of this process, but we're getting more now. Mitigation, climate change mitigation, scenario analysis again, linking to ongoing research, future of livestock, the tradition and modernity components, co-production of knowledge. So really getting in the futures here, which is really exciting for me, because I'm looking forward to continuing to work with everyone in the region on this question when we're allowed to sort of meet in person again. Climate change adaptation, emission intensities. I think, yeah, that was an interesting part coming out of the first week on mitigation. Uncertainty is coming up. A lot of different configurations of the future. The use of models. I think that was sort of quite strong through all of the different workshops, particularly the first week. Starting to get a wider range now. Like climate change mitigation involves everyone. I think that's an important learning. Mainstreaming, for sure. Again, scenario building processes, uncertainties and models. I think that's really important. Great. So I see we're sitting at 19 responses now. I'll just give a few more seconds in case there's some more people who are still thinking about what they'd like to put in. And if not, there's just a final slide, no, second to last, final slide on general feedback. So this won't come up on the screen, but just what do we do right? What could be improved upon? And then in particular, what future topics might be of interest? If there were specific aspects that you wanted to delve in more deeply around and questions on that, we'd be really appreciative to hear your feedback on this. Thank you. And I'm also just keeping a note on how many people are responding. We've had 2 so far. Almost there. Thank you. So we've had 4 respondents so far. I guess this is the kind of thing that actually requires everyone to think a little bit. So sorry about the time pressure. They're always a concern with these online meetings and meetings in general, even if we're all just meeting on our computers. But we did really just want to give everyone the opportunity to provide some feedback on the sessions, so that we can improve. Okay, 10, starting to get them coming in thick and fast. Again, this is a very strange process. I feel like I'm talking to myself on giving a running commentary on what everyone's doing. Really different circumstances to what we're used to, doing everything online. But I think we're all adapting well, and hopefully the feedback from this poll will help us improve these online sessions and make them as useful as possible to everyone. That's the main aim. So I see we've had 11 responses so far. I'll just give a 12, there we go, a few more seconds to see if any more start to come in. And then then there's just one final slide, and what I'll do is I'll just leave that one up and let people comment on it, because it's just asking for opinions and sort of lines of the main take-homes from everyone. And this is in particular important for us to be able to share with our donors, so that they're aware of the kind of sessions that we're running and the feedback that we're getting. So that's 17 responses, fantastic. Thank you so much everyone for doing this. We really appreciate it. Really, really great to get everyone's feedback. And because it's still ticking over, I'm not going to shift over yet. Really excited to see what everyone manages to say about this. So I know we had 20 respondents on the first poll. So I'll just see if we get to that for this feedback. Before moving on, I think 19 seems to be where we're at. So great. And then the final slide is any final comments. So this is just free text. Please feel free to just put in some comments, on particular things that sort of stood out for you that were useful. Maybe you can build on what you put into the word cloud initially, but you can sort of have a chance to come up with something a little bit more specific, and comments on that. And hopefully we'll start to get those, should be coming in real time. But I think what I might do is, while we leave this up, I might hand over to Polly to close the session for us. Yes, thanks so much to everyone who participated. Oh, I see. I think Polly's actually had to go off. Maybe Todd or Lutz, you'd like to do sort of a final wrap up also from your sessions, just to everyone. That would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Laura.
Sure.
Todd, you want to go first, or shall I go first?
I'll take a first swing. I will be very brief. Yeah, it's really just thanking everyone for taking the time 3 weeks in a row to invest in these sessions. It's been, I think, very valuable for us to be sharing our information with you and to get your feedback on it and how that fits into your work and your thinking. Yeah, and we look forward to carrying these forward. Hopefully some feedback about what sorts of topics you'd like to see in the future would be forthcoming, whether in the Menti or in later feedback. So over to you for the final close, Lutz.
Okay, there's a very little chat. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Laura, for making this possible. Besides also being thankful for everyone who participated and also who joined all the 3 weeks in a row. I just want to say that this was also a first for our experience to do these sort of seminars virtual. And we're looking forward to offer similar things in the future again. And we're going to assess your feedback in terms of where we should probably adjust, or which things we can do differently, better, hopefully, and also which other topics may come. So thank you very much, everyone.
Great, thank you so much. And I think on that note, again, a thank you from me for participating in this process with us. And we're going to learn a lot. And I look forward to engaging with everyone again, either online or in person, as we move to being able to have in-person meetings. So thank you so much. I will close the Zoom, but I will leave the Menti open for a little bit longer if anyone wants to continue to add in their thoughts or comments on that. So thank you, everyone.